Got it. All right. I'll go ahead and start off then. Thank you guys. Greetings to all. Thank you for having me here today to talk about my favorite topic of all time, which is soil. Today, we're going to be covering a bit of the background of soils, what we consider a healthy soil to be, how the soil flora and fauna are critical to building these healthy soils, and the role of soil biology in composting, as well as the benefits we see from composting on every scale and a quick and dirty method for starting your own compost operation. So first of all, I am a soil scientist. I work with the NRCS as a federally employed soil scientist and am dedicating my life to the study and pursuit of soil knowledge. One of the foundations of that study is understanding what the soil is. To paraphrase the official taxonomical definition of soil, it is a natural body comprised of solids, both mineral and organic in nature, liquids and gases that occur at the land's surface, and is characterized by horizons, as we can see in these images here, the horizonation, as well as have the ability to support planted roots. On the screen, I have 4 images of different soil profiles where we uncover the natural surface so that we can collect samples and study what happens beneath our feet. So through studying these soils, we found that there are many kinds of soils. There are unique physical, chemical, and biological properties to each of these different regions of soils, which has led to developing an entire taxonomy dedicated to classifying soils. If you're very curious about soil taxonomy, you can find it at the nrcs.usda.gov website, but just really quickly off the top, so we can discuss what the properties of soil are without pulling out long data sheets. We have soil classification. It works very similar to how we classify animals. We won't get too deep into it here, but there are 12 main soil orders that further branch out until we arrive at the individual soils in our area. For our local soils, we typically describe them by their soil series name. At the soil series level, there are over 20,000 officially described soils in the United States, with more being added as we continue to map the remainder of the United States. The National Soil Mapping Program in the USA, this is kind of a side note, it was established in 1899, which isn't that long ago, in my opinion. The earliest nationwide soil map was published by M. Whitney in 1909, and it was mostly based off the geology that they had known at the time. In 1912, they published the next countrywide map. It showed 22 soil units. And then further and further iterations of soil mapping has finally brought us to what we know as soil science today. This is a map of the United States of the 12 soil orders. So just covering the main 12 groups. It's an incredibly elaborate and detailed database that we have now. This is a distribution across the United States. And you may recall from Phil Smith's presentation last week that the Web Soil Survey website is an excellent source for finding information and interpreting that information for the soils that we do currently know. I'd love to point out here that in California, we have a nice modeling of all the different soil types, the main soil orders. We have at least one soil representative from each order in California. And from what I understand, we are the only state in the United States to have all 12. But all of this is just to say that soils are important. In fact, soil is a critical part of our ecosystem. All of the living systems occurring above and below the ground are determined by the properties of the soil. Our atmosphere, hydrosphere, and biosphere are codependent with the soil to maintain their ecosystem services. Yet academically, we have kind of ignored the soil until fairly recently. It wasn't until the mid 1800s to early 1900s that soils became an official area of study, a scientific area of study. And research outside of traditional farming started to take place. This is for many reasons, some superficial ones being soils are out of sight, they're out of mind, something easily disregarded as a dead surface from which plants are just springing forth. But as we've learned in the last 200 years, soils are incredibly active, both biologically, chemically, and physically. And it's critical to consider when dealing with holistic management. So let's dig in. what is a soil? So there are some major components of the soil. They're primarily composed of minerals. About 45% of a volume of soil is minerals, mostly rocks that have broken down into solid particles of sand, silt, and clay. Sand particles, just real cursory over the top, are the largest, and the clay particles are the smallest. And the clay portion is actually where much of the chemical action of the soil takes place. And it holds a substantial amount of water. We won't be getting into too much of that today. And while a soil can be all sand, all clay, or all silt, that is very rare. Usually soils are a combination of those three. Besides the mineral component of the soil, we have the liquid and the gas component. These are typically broken down about 25% water, 25% air, as it varies depending on seasonal changes and where the soil is located. But 25% most of the time for most soils. The smallest fraction of soils is the organic matter, which is about 5% in most regions. I'm actually located in a more arid region on the upper north side of the San Bernardino Mountains, and the soil organic matter here is like 3% or less on average. It's very, very low. Organic matter consists of dead plant and animal tissue and the microorganisms that live in the soil. While organic matter accounts for only about 5% of the volume of most soils, it is a critical part of the soil, and it's what we'll be focusing on today. Organic matter has many functions, including providing food for organisms, helping hold the water in the soil, providing nutrients for plants, and more we'll get into later, especially as we're talking about composting. Just really quick, here in the image, we have the topsoil. That tiny topsoil is where most of the organic material is located. Unfortunately, this is the layer that erodes first because it's on the top. So we'll often lose the topsoil where that biologically very active organic matter is. That's the first thing to go, which is a problem. There's also the subsoil, which is more of a integration of organic and mineral matter. And as we go deeper and deeper, the subsoil gets closer to bedrock for soils that formed in place and become more mineral based. Soil is like the Earth's skin. It's what we always say. We can't live without our skin, so we can't live without the soil. And why? Because soil performs many functions that are fundamental for life, such as soils provide habitat for soil organisms, mostly microscopic creatures that account for most of the life on Earth. Soils are so full of life that the soil itself sometimes seems to be alive. The microorganisms in the soil help to process and recycle nutrients, including carbon, so that living things can use them over and over again. The dead plants and animals are recycled into nutrients. Soils can filter and purify the water we drink and use every day. Microorganisms can use some of the chemicals present in our waters as food by breaking them down, which we refer to as biodegradation. Soils modify the atmosphere by emitting and absorbing dust and many gases, including carbon dioxide, methane, and water vapor. Soils provide nutrients and a place for plants to grow. And most of our food comes directly or indirectly from the plants that are grown in these soils. And then our houses, buildings, and cities are built on top of the soil as like an engineering medium. So which brings us to an important question in today's, in our discussions of soils. And it's how do we measure if our soils are performing these vital functions? And this is how we came across the term soil health. So what is a healthy soil? It's a more recently developed concept, but we needed one because rampant soil degradation, I'm sure we're all familiar with the Dust Bowl, has been irrevocably damaging our farmable landscapes. And we needed a way to describe what a healthy soil was, so we have a goal to strive towards. And so this is whether or not a soil is able to provide its ecosystem services to us. Soil health is defined as the continued capacity of soil to function as a vital living ecosystem that sustains plants, animals, and humans. Healthy soils give us clean air and water, bountiful crops and forests, productive grazing lands, diverse wildlife, and beautiful landscapes. Soil does all this by performing 5 essential functions, the ones that we just went over right here. Now, how does the NRCS define soil health? Health is usually used in the context of a living organism. So managing soils for optimum health, in a way, ensures that they are sustainable / alive for future generations. Soil health focuses on the importance of soil function and soil as a living resource. When we speak of soil health, we are talking about improving the capacity of soil to function as a vital living ecosystem that sustains plants, animals, and humans. Now, the term health was purposely chosen instead of quality. Quality implies analysis and quantifying. Health implies management actions that leads to a condition or a state. There's something that can be done to change it to a positive trend. The key to the definition is that soil health is the continued capacity. This implies rejuvenation and then sustainability. Soil is a living ecosystem, recognizing the ground beneath us as a living ecosystem. And then it's soil function. Soils need to provide the basic functions for food and fiber production. Now, degraded soils that have a decreased function have telltale characteristics. There is generally agreement that weather events related to precipitation and temperature are becoming more extreme. Our droughts are extreme. Our freezings are more extreme. More frequent extensive droughts, more intense rainfall events, higher temperatures. If we have proper soil function, these should contribute to mediate some of these extreme events. With inadequate water infiltration, we can get excessive water erosion, which you see in this first image here. Poor soil water storage capacity can result in greater incidence of drought stress, like this one, this very poorly surface cresting field. Aggregate instability makes some soils mud pits when it rains. You can see that in the middle image here at the bottom, where the tractor is deep in the mud. And although nutrient and pesticide applications are important for maintaining crop production, excessive dependence on inputs often is an indication that soils are not significantly contributing to crop growth needs. There are also broader societal consequences resulting from the way that annual crops are typically managed. When management includes routine, full-width tillage, resulting in plant residues being buried, and minimal crop diversity, like corn beans, the resulting changes in soil can be described as a downward spiral. So here we have the up arrows indicating increased tillage. The decreasing arrows is a decrease in residue, decrease in diversity of plants. We're only planting corn beans in this theoretical example. And as we continue this management practice, our soil organic matter continues to be depleted and our risk of erosion and compaction increase, which decreases the aggregate stability, which we'll get into a little bit more later, which increases surface cresting and surface compaction, which decreases the infiltration capability of the soil and increases erosion then even more, which decreases soil organic matter from that topsoil significantly. Nutrients get transposed, topsoil gets removed. Then we have increased ponding. Our soils can't hold water anymore. Our nutrient availability goes down and the disease of the soil increases. It is a bad system to get into. This is the typical condition of our annual cropland in the United States. Soils in this condition would be characterized as low resilience and low resistance. Our agriculture systems that seek to improve soil function can reverse these trends. So this is what we're fighting when we're advocating for soil health. Oh, and there we go. As well as decreased crop yields. And as we decrease crop yields, that means we're getting less productivity for the arable land that we have, which could increase hunger and malnutrition. So what do we do? The loss of soil function directly affects productivity. Loss of productivity capacity, especially in light of the extreme weather events we've been having, is compounded by the loss of farm and ranch acres. Permanent loss of agricultural land threatens the food security of the nation and means that the remaining land must be made more productive to meet food and fiber demands. And even though technology is working to increase our productivity, we really do need to maintain arable soil for a long-term solution to these issues. And then just some quick fact points for you. Between 1992 and 2012, we lost nearly 31 million acres of arable land farmable land. 11 million of those acres were the best farmland acres in the nation, and 62% of all development was on farmland. So what do we do with damaged soil? Our first step is to increase soil aggregation with enhanced biological activity. It's this bottom step here. This slide simply shows how soil changes when soil biology is enhanced, with the stabilization of soil biology being the first step in changing the soil organic matter content. Changes in soil organic matter manifest in the invisible processes of organic matter decay and nutrient cycling, and finally in the visible processes of improved aggregate structure and water availability. And we get that noticeable change way up here as the soil structure improves after we start fighting to reinvigorate that soil biology. Which brings us here. Soil biology, what is happening in there? So for improving soil aggregation starts with improving the microbiology present in our soil organic matter, then we need to study the soil ecology, which is just how these organisms are interacting with one another inside the soil. So we have an image here of the soil food web. Soil ecology is simply the study of how soil organisms interact with other organisms and their environment, as well as their influence on and response to numerous soil processes and properties. Some of the key processes we study in soil are nutrient cycling, soil aggregate formation, and biodiversity interactions. The animals of the soil range in size from macrofauna, such as the prairie dogs and moles and earthworms and millipedes. And then we have the mesofauna level, which would be tiny springtails and mites still visible. And then microfauna, such as nematodes and single cell protozoans. The flora of the soil include the roots of higher plants, as well as microscopic algae and diatoms. Other microorganisms include fungi and bacteria, which tend to dominate in terms of numbers and mass and metabolic capacity. A typical healthy soil might contain several species of invertebrate animals like mice, gophers, snakes, etc. Maybe a half dozen species of earthworms, 20 to 30 species of mites, 50 to 100 species of insects like beetles and ants, dozens of nematodes, hundreds of species of fungi, and probably thousands of species of bacteria. Soil organisms represent about a quarter of all the biodiversity on Earth, yet are wildly neglected in conservation efforts. Quite simply, soil species are out of sight and out of mind. But taking steps to study them may be double useful, with representatives of nearly every phylum of living things being found in the soil. It has been academically estimated that soils host about 25% of Earth's biodiversity, and I do have their references at the end of this, but I have it keyed in there just in case anyone's interested. Another about 90% they estimate haven't even been cultured or fully identified. There is an excellent research article posted in 2020 that discusses the blind spots in our current databases when it comes to accounting for soil biology and how to address that, as well as an organization, the Global Soil Biodiversity.org, that dedicates itself to linking our current knowledge in biology into an accessible database for current researchers. So where do we find these apparently huge amounts of soil organisms in our soil? We have biological hotspots. Let me just throw them up here. Soils can be viewed as a medium with a number of biologically relevant spheres of influence or hotspots. Although not exclusive of each other, each of these hotspots have distinct properties that contribute to the interactions between the organisms and the biogeochemical processes that they are impacting. A highly functioning soil will support all of these hotspots. As we can see in the image above, these zones include the litter layer at the top. As plants are produced above ground, that biomass dies, and that residue forms a layer of food for the primary consumers. As these residues decompose, earthworm activity and root channels support increased biological activity and aid in the formation of macropores and strong, stable aggregates. We also have the chemically active area around the plant roots, known as the rhizosphere. where soil microbes are stimulated by the release of sugars from plant roots as an output of photosynthesis. A highly functioning soil supports all of these, and it strengthens the soil through the formation of the soil aggregates, and it helps our soil climb back up that ladder towards greater soil health. I actually have a quick video here that I'm hoping we'll be able to play. In a biologically active soil, as soon as the leaf, stalk, or piece of bark drops to the ground, it's subject to the coordinated attack by microflora and macro and mesofauna. So this video is part of the Soil Life in Action project, and it helps us to see that process in action. So here we have on the left and on the right, soil fauna such as earthworms, potworms, mites, and isopods over a 15-week period. And then on the left, there's no fauna, there's just microflora. And you can see the fungal activity is increasing, but it's much, much slower. Most of the work of the soil community is carried out by creatures whose jaws are chemical enzymes that eat away at all manner of organic substances left in the soil. It's a beautiful synergistic relationship that changes the conditions of the raw material and breaks them down into humus, or what we would call soil organic matter. This would rejuvenate the soil and strengthens the resilience to changes in the environment. And it's one of the core foundations to building soils. Through our study of soil ecology, we can harness this community of organisms to regenerate our soils and recycle our waste into stronger food systems. Which is why, and I'll let it, I love watching them eat through those leaves. It's very fun. It's a mesmerizing video, but we'll go ahead and move on. Oh, that's actually, I changed the share here. 1 second. I'm going to start a new share because my screen went full screen with that video. Excuse me here. All right, and there we go. Let's see where you guys are at. Oh, that's strange. All right. So that's why we compost. And this is the last bit of what we're going to discuss today. What is compost? Composting is the product from the biological degradation of the organic waste materials. So similar to what we were just watching with the microbiology chewing down those leaves, it is the natural process of recycling organic matter, such as leaves and food scraps, into valuable fertilizer that can enrich the soil for plant available food. Anything that grows decomposes. Eventually, composting is just a sped up process by providing an ideal environment for bacteria, fungi, and the other organisms to do their work. The resulted decomposed material, which looks like the fertile garden soil we typically associate with very healthy soil, is rich in nutrients and is used in gardening and horticulture and agriculture. So the mechanism of composting, organic matter such as leaves and grass clippings and garden plants and kitchen scraps and shredded paper, these make excellent compost materials. Leaves, woody branches, and paper have a high carbon content, which microorganisms need for energy. Grass clippings and vegetables are higher in nitrogen, which is needed to make the enzymes used in decomposition and other processes. In other words, carbon-rich materials are the food and nitrogen-rich materials, and the optimum balance is about 25, the optimum carbon to nitrogen ratio is important for composting, but I wouldn't get too hung up on it. And we'll go over a little bit further with a quick recipe, some of the quick and dirty rules for starting a quick compost cycle. But here, the carbon optimum is 25 carbon to 1 nitrogen, or about 30 to 1, or 5 parts of browns to 1 part of greens. some of the composting benefits, this is the heart to me of why we compost. Reducing the waste stream. Composting is an excellent way to recycle organic waste that we generate at home. The food scraps and garden waste combined make up more than 28% of what we throw away. Not only is food waste a significant burden on our environment, but processing it is costly. The average cost to landfill municipal solid waste in the United States was about $55 per ton in 2019, with the United States generating more than 265 million tons of municipal waste in 2017, and sending 2/3 of that to landfills and incinerators. We spend billions of dollars on waste management. Waste generation in the United States has increased dramatically since 1960s as a result of increased consumerism and our throwaway culture. Where composting at home would allow us to divert some of the waste from our landfills and turn it into something practical for our yards. We also cut methane emissions from landfills. You see, when organic matter is decomposing, it's undergoing aerobic decomposition. It's being broken down by microorganisms that don't need oxygen to survive. Aerobic decomposition is one that need oxygen to survive. When we're putting the compost in a landfill, we're cutting it off of that oxygen supply by burying it under trash. And then they undergo anaerobic decomposition, which does not require oxygen. But during anaerobic decomposition, they actually create biogas as a byproduct. And that's 50% methane and 50% carbon dioxide, which is just a mechanic of anaerobic decomposition. These are both potent greenhouse gases, with methane being 28 to 36 times more effective than CO2 at trapping heat in our atmosphere, which was measured over a century. Although most modern landfills have methane capturing systems, these do not capture all of the gas. Landfills are the third largest source of human-generated methane emissions in the United States. Because our solid waste infrastructure was designed around landfilling, only about 6% of food waste gets composted. However, states, cities, and individual businesses and vendors are spearheading zero waste strategies to increase composting and recycling rates within their jurisdictions and to keep waste from being generated in the first place. There have been a lot of composting success stories, with one notable example being San Francisco. In 1996, San Francisco established a large-scale composting system. And by 2000, it was able to divert 50% of its waste from landfills. By increasing its goals over the years, San Francisco has been diverting more than 80% of waste from landfills since 2012. That means more than 90,000 metric tons of carbon emissions are avoided each year, equivalent to the annual greenhouse gas emissions from 20,000 passenger vehicles. We also improve our soil health and lessen erosion. Through composting, we have an essential tool for improving large-scale agricultural systems. Compost contains 3 primary nutrients needed by garden crops: nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. It also includes trace other elements like calcium, magnesium, iron, and zinc. And instead of relying on synthetic fertilizers that can contain harmful chemicals, composting offers an organic alternative. Research has shown the capability of compost to increase soil water's retention capacity, productivity, and resilience. Focusing here on the water, agriculture is a major consumer of water in the United States. It accounts for about 80% of the nation's water use. Irrigation systems are effective, but expensive and time-consuming for farmers to manage. Additionally, water is becoming increasingly difficult to obtain across the country. I'm sure that we're all very familiar with that with our location. How can composting help us? It has been shown that water retaining capacities of soil increase with the addition of organic matter, with 1% increase in soil organic matter helping the soil to hold 20,000 gallons more water per acre. By using compost to foster healthy soil, farmers do not have to use as much water and can still have higher yields compared with farming over degraded soils. And then the reducing personal food waste. Consumers are responsible for a staggering amount of wasted food, and that's us. An average American family of 4 throws out about $150 worth of food per month, a 50% increase since the 1970s. The NRDC research in 3 US cities indicated that the category of edible food most wasted by households are fruits and vegetables. There is a study in The Guardian, a 2016 report that was posted in The Guardian, that detailed that over 60 million tons or $160 billion worth of produce are thrown away annually. The best way to reduce this food waste is to prevent waste from occurring in the first place. So the NRDC is actually a program that works through its Save the Food campaign to help us, the consumers, shop for, prepare, and store food to minimize that waste. However, even if we do everything possible to decrease food waste, there will still be food scraps that cannot be consumed, like banana peels. Composting is an excellent way to recycle these discards instead of tossing them in the trash. So this is our quick and dirty method, composting, the not so secret recipe. Organisms that decompose organic waste need 4 key elements to thrive: nitrogen, carbon, air, and water. Since all compostable materials contain carbon with varying amounts of nitrogen, composting successfully is just a matter of using the right combination of materials to achieve the best ratio of carbon to nitrogen, which is 25:1 to 30:1, and obtaining the right amounts of air and water to yield the best results. If your pile has too much carbon-rich material, it'll be drier and take longer to break down. Too much nitrogen-rich material can end up creating a slimy, wet, and smelly compost pile. Fortunately, these problems are easily remedied by adding carbon-rich or nitrogen-rich material as needed. Nitrogen is one of the basic building blocks of life, and it's essential for growth and reproduction in both plants and animals. A higher nitrogen to carbon ratio is most commonly found in fresh organic material, which we call greens. Having plenty of greens in your compost pile makes sure the decomposers can grow and reproduce quickly. Some household greens you could consider adding are like grass clippings or food scraps or coffee grounds. Another element is carbon, higher proportions of which can be found in brown material, like plant material. Typical browns you could add to a compost pile include dead leaves, branches, twigs, and paper. Carbon acts as a food source for decomposers, helping them to stay alive while they break down the waste. To achieve the best carbon to nitrogen ratio in a home compost system, a rule of thumb is to put in 2 to 4 parts brown material for every 1 part green material. Or like we said earlier on the other side, I think it was like 5:1. So just aiming for a rough ratio there. Lastly, as we've discussed earlier in the slides, our soil organisms need oxygen and water to break down the material. Optimum airflow can be achieved by layering materials and making sure that the raw materials are in small pieces, ideally no thicker than a finger, and to turn the compost pile regularly so it gets aerated. That can be done with a simple pitchfork or by using a rotating compost bin. When I was a kid, we used like 50-gallon drums, and then my job as the kid was to roll it across the yard every once in a while. For moisture, you want to keep the compost pile damp, like a wrung out sponge. There are finer details for optimizing your compost production, but this is the basis, the 4 critical components for starting off your home compost pile. In conclusion, as the world population and food production demands rise, keeping our soil healthy and productive is of paramount importance. By farming using soil health principles and systems that rejuvenate and regenerate our soil, more and more farmers are increasing their soil's organic matter and improving microbial activity. As a result, we're sequestering more carbon, we're increasing our water infiltration, we're improving wildlife and pollinator habitats, and all while harvesting better profits and better yields and reducing the burden on our waste processing. There's an old adage I like that I'll share. It goes, a poor farmer grows weeds, a good farmer grows vegetables, but a great farmer grows soil. And that's it. All right, if you have any questions, I am more than happy to answer them.
Caitlin, I have a question. And first of all, I want to thank you for such an educational webinar for us all. especially like your emphasis on the composting, because that is key to our current theme this year of waste to resources, because we're following the Senate Bill 1383. Now that's mandating this diversion that you're talking about of green waste to landfills. So my question is, in my experience, when I was working at EPA and working in partnership with NRCS, whenever there was extreme catastrophic wildfires, such as back in 90 or 89 in the Oakland Hills, we had an emergency watershed team that would come out, and it includes soil scientists from NRCS. And they would come out with this one soil scientist from NRCS had a little honey bear that was filled with water, and he would do a soils test to see the condition of the soil after such a hot burn. And as we know, we're getting a lot of that much more frequently throughout the West, particularly here in California. Can you tell me what happens when there's such a hot and widespread catastrophic wildfire? What does it do to the soils and its biodiversity and the organisms? And how does that get restored, or how do they populate the soils with those critters again?
All right, so from what I understand, that is because we're removing a lot of the above ground vegetation, we're burning it off. I'm gonna invite Phil Smith to jump in here if he's familiar with the after effects of fire burning on soils. But that's my understanding, is we've depleted the biodiversity on the surface of the soil and we've destabilized it. So that soil is now at risk of eroding and then dislocating to new location. The first step to re-establishing that soil would be to get plants back into it, to put that structure back into place, and then that brings back the biodiversity to it. But Phil, if you have anything to add, you're more than welcome to.
Sure. Yes, I don't know how, I'm not an expert on that, but I do know that the biology of the soil is severely damaged for at least a few centimeters or a few inches. And also the chemistry of the organic matter near the surface changes to the point where the soil is it repels water. It's hydrophobic, and so when you have a lot of hydrophobic soils on steeper slopes, and then you get a lot of rain coming in, and this is after the fire has gone. This could be months. It could be a year later. You have a lot of water that just cannot infiltrate into the soil surface, and that's why you have runoff and erosion because of that. But I mean, eventually over time, the soil will, it'll rebuild itself.
This is Jovita. I am monitoring the chat box, and Caitlin, we've had more students join us since you started your webinar, and all of them are expressing their thanks and appreciation for your webinars. But I still want to know if there are any other questions out there.
I have a question. I was just wondering, we learned so much from this webinar. Thank you so much. But through Envirothon, our goal is to have more community-based activities. So when we learn the importance of composting and soil health, it's great for us. But then how do we, let's say we have a city that we want to encourage composting. What would be a fantastic way to kind of include the community more with, I know that giving webinars like this and giving lectures is one of the great ways to do it. Is there any other way that's like a community based that can help composting?
Again, Phil, you're welcome to anyone's input on this, but to me, I see the roots really take place in schools. So in high school, what you're doing right now is you're being educated about it, going through community college or your college system, forming, and to me, it's very grassroots, but collecting that interest and then getting a group of people to invest in that interest. So at a college level, you'll often find the community campuses, if you can get them to start a composting system, and then they can pull in the city to work with them. That's, to me, how I would see it would be done. But I would definitely call on Jovita or Phil if you know how these mechanisms are getting into place, because I am still very recent to this as well. And I think it's an excellent question.
Yeah, I just want to add to that. Let's see, Alex, I just want to say there was a webinar that we did. It was an interview with Lynn Fang with LA Compost. I think that should be up on our webinar. I'll check into it, but it talked about getting communities involved, local communities involved in composting. I would recommend that you go look at that webinar, because Los Angeles generates a ton of organic waste. And because of this Senate bill, they diverted some of that to compost facilities. And then some of it was sent to local collection hubs in communities where there were nonprofits involved. And they worked with the communities and students to have it be a collection site for the local community to drop off their green waste, their lawn clippings and their kitchen waste. And then they use some, and then with that quality compost, they have community gardens for growing vegetables and fruit that feed some of these communities that are perhaps low income or don't have access to quality produce. So I would recommend that you and others go back and look at that interview, because I learned a lot just from listening to Lynn Fang.
I'll check it out. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And I would add to that, if there are any community gardens in your area, or any opportunities to volunteer to help with things, just go and get your hands dirty.
Exactly. Now, I want you all to know, and I want to check this with Caitlin. This is a recorded webinar. We will post it up on our website under our YouTube channel, where we have a team on a steering committee that's seeing to that. But once you look at the recorded webinar and you have additional questions or any questions to the recorded ones, we are saying you may email the presenter. And in this case, obviously it's Caitlin. Email her with your questions. And Caitlin, would you be okay with that?
Absolutely, absolutely.
So, because we want the webinars to be very interactive with students. So if you didn't think of a question today, email Caitlin and just say, hey, could you explain this again, or whatever your question may be? And she'll get back to you. She's part of our resources advisory panel group of natural resources experts. And so, yeah, so pose any questions or comment to her or any of the other presenters, and get your response. So, Caitlin, I will provide your email to everyone so they know how to reach you.
Perfect.
All right.
Yeah, that sounds fantastic. And just really quick, it's very simple. It's just my first name, last name, Caitlin.valverde@usda.gov. But then if you'd also provide it to them, that would be perfect.
Why don't you type it in the chat box?
Of course.
So we have another soils webinar coming up next Wednesday, I think, no, the 19th, which is a Saturday, excuse me. I think it's from 1:30 to 2:30. You will be getting additional information on that, including the content of it. I think the focus will be on vermiculture. And it's going to be given by Caleb Griffith. He's with NRCS out of the Susanville office. And I hope you put that on your calendar for next Saturday, and hear what he has to talk about worms and soil. I mean, Caitlin touched on that herself.
No, good luck with that, you guys. I wish you guys the absolute best for Envirothon this year.
Thank you very much, Caitlin. So any quick questions before we end the session? I see lots of thank yous for you, Caitlin. So fine job. I thank you ever so much.
Thank you.
All right. Take care, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your Saturday.
You
Thank
too.
you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.